And welcome to another Mark Bishop show. And of course, the series where there's nothing like a good book. Yeah. And I tell you, we've had some fabulous authors and some fabulous books, not the least my special guest today. This book is called Tiny Blunders, Big Disaster, right? Tiny Blunders, Big Disasters. We're going to be looking at, well, not today, but in the book covers 39 tiny mistakes. But they changed the world forever. So, folks, again and again throughout history, we find tiny mistakes, blunders, as Jared Knott calls them here, leading to big disasters. Battles and campaigns sometimes turn on a small mistake or oversight, which then produces disaster for one side or the other. Even the fate of nations has sometimes been decided in this way. And as this book demonstrates, you're going to understand more and more and more. So I'd like to welcome author Jared Knott right through to There's Nothing Like a Good Book. Welcome, Jared.
Good to be here. It's an honor to be on your show.
Thank you. I know you're busy. You've been very busy with all the traveling you have to do because of apparently all these awards you've been winning. And in fact, where do you rate on the bestseller list right now?
Yes, I'm happy to say that we're number one in 9 different categories on Amazon, including we're number one in the Civil War, which is one of the largest categories. And we also are number 6 in the world history category and number 23 in U.S. history. And it's been on the bestseller list almost, it'll be 8 months, like the 3rd of August. So that's been very gratifying. And we've gotten excellent reviews. We've had over 900 people that have given us reviews, including we got a very good one from the Mensa Bulletin, my fellow Mensans, and I appreciate that. That gave us a nice little surge in sales. So it's been kind of a thrilling ride, considering there's 1.2 million books a year published. To be near the top of the heap is a very good feeling.
Oh, my word, my friend, and congrats to you. Well done. I mean, starting out, did you really anticipate you'd achieve this much?
Well, it's funny. You hear all the odds. And I say, gee whiz, so many books, hundreds of thousands, haven't got a chance, haven't got a chance. And part of you believes it and part of you doesn't. But I believed in the book so much that I just I loved working on it, and I loved communicating and talking about it, plus loved writing it. And so that was the main motivation. And it's just that much more of a bonus to have it being so well received.
Well, tiny blunders, big disasters. The main message of this book is that it details left unattended or seemingly small items that are overlooked that can snowball into disaster in the long or even the short term, right?
That's right. Exactly right. Exactly right. My inspiration comes from the old adage comes down from Benjamin Franklin, that for want of the nail, the shoe was lost. For want of the shoe, the rider was lost. For want of the rider, the battle was lost. For want of the battle, the empire was lost. The empire was lost, all for the want of a nail. But the question then was, how often is that? It's a nice little saying, but how often does that really happen? That a single tiny mistake causes an entire empire to collapse? You will be amazed how often it's happened over and over again.
And you give good examples in the book. There's no doubt about that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
What was I going to say? Of course, in human affairs, perfection is really unattainable. But the reader, I guess, in this should reflect on the innumerable avoidable disasters that have occurred as a result of tiny blunders and oversights. Now, I remember the butterfly effect, the movie, as discussed in your introduction. This is a term used in chaos theory. Basically, It refers to the postulate that a small event can contribute to or produce a big effect in a chain of events. Now, the term gets its name from the supposed ability of the butterfly flapping its wings on one side of the world to affect the weather on the opposite side of the globe. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. In fact, it was a professor, Lorenz, who first came up with the expression, and also it was Edward Norton Lorenz, who was a famous mathematician. And the way it began, he was running this computer program that had a series of numbers, a decimal point, and like 18 numbers behind the decimal point. And it was taking forever with the old computers for the number to run. So what you was 13, 18 numbers. Why don't we whack off the last 5 or 6, make it only 10 or 11 or 12? That small little change couldn't really affect the outcome, could it? Well, he did that, and he was amazed in weather prediction, what a difference it made, those little tiny numbers at the end, removing them and a difference it made in the final outcome. And so, well, gee whiz, it's dominoes. One change affects another, and so that means that a butterfly flapping its wings. And this is the analogy he used in giving this, delivering his paper. A butterfly flapping its wings in Brazil can set off a chain reaction that ends up being a cyclone in Texas a year and a half later. There was a slight overstatement, a little bit of a hyperbole, but it's the basic thing that one little domino gets toppled over, and then it sets off 1,000 dominoes following, and catastrophic results at the end of the line of progression.
Yeah, heavy stuff.
Yes,
Well,
yes.
the butterfly effect. Now, Arthur Schlesinger, okay, a junior, the Pulitzer Prize winning historian.
Yes.
And he was
Well.
a special advisor, I think, to President Kennedy, too.
That is correct. And also, of course, a noted historian, yes.
Okay, now, in the book it says he made the observation that kings, generals, and presidents tend to make their biggest mistakes immediately following their greatest victories.
That's correct. That's correct. Yes, that's one of my favorite chapters in the book. It's the victory disease on the Texas frontier, and it gives an example of a famous, notorious, and by the way, a very sadistic man who was guilty of that very thing. The Japanese have a word for it. It's a victory disease, and they themselves fell prey to it in World War II. Hitler fell prey to it. One success after another success after another success. The whole attitude becomes one we can't lose. Of course, the momentum is behind us. We can do this, and it leads to the overreaching and leads to disaster.
Well, perhaps the most famous example, too, of Murphy's Law run amok, the fate of the White Star liner RMS Titanic.
Yes, that's an interesting story in itself. There was several different factors which caused the ship to sink. There was apparently a fire on board which scorched the front, the right bow, the starboard bow of the ship, but that was in such a position that you couldn't see it from the dock. But there was a fire burning, and Captain Smith was very eager to get across the Atlantic before the fire caused further damage. It's one of the reasons he was in such a hurry. But the tiny little mistake there with the Titanic was that they changed second officers on the ship at the last minute. And somehow, in the exchange between the two officers, the key to the locker, which held the binoculars, they were called glasses at the time, was not passed on to the new second officer. And so the people up there in the crow's nest had to observe the open Atlantic with a naked eye at night. They came across a dark iceberg, a black iceberg, and they did not see it in time. Now, one of the gentlemen survived, one of the people in the crow's nest survived. And in the investigation later, we were asking, what about the binoculars? Well, we didn't get them. If you had had them, would it have made a difference? Yes, it would have. How much of a difference? Well, we would have seen it in time to be able to get out of the way.
Yeah.
So just the fact they didn't have the key, they didn't have the binoculars, instead of avoiding the iceberg altogether, the starboard side of the ship scraped along the edge of the ice scraper, tore open a number of the panels. The ship filled with water. The ship sank, and all of that could have been avoided. 1,500 people, and the ship would have been saved, except for that key not being passed along by the right person at the right time.
Such a tiny thing for such a massive outcome. You know?
Yes, absolutely.
Now, another excerpt here. Compared to simple soldiers and sailors, generals and admirals are rarely killed in war, but when they do fall, their deaths can sometimes change the outcome of a battle or a campaign, or for that matter, even a war.
Yes, it can. And there was General McPherson, who was a rising star in the Union Army. Some people thought of him as the most outstanding man in the entire Union Army. Other people thought that he might have lived to become president. He was the United States. He was very generous in dealing with civilians. He was an excellent military leader. And there in the battles leading up to the siege of Atlanta, he had his entourage around him, and he rode out ahead of them and rode into some Confederate soldiers. They put the rifles on him, put your hands up. And he, noble man that he was, he doffed his hat to them and turned to ride away. It was Texas troops, shoot him, and they shot him, of course, through the back, and he was killed. But that was a great loss of a potentially great leader. Historians have talked about why is it that Eisenhower and maybe Patton and some other the generals MacArthur were successful, well, they had the advantage of Fortuna, the goddess of good fortune, behind them. And that's one thing that McPherson lacked. He had everything else
Huh.
except some good luck. Plus, he should have stayed with his entourage, which would have been safer, and he might have survived the war.
I mean, you never know what's around the corner. I mean,
Right.
I'm speaking with Jared Knott, in case you've just joined. His book is called Tiny Blunders, Big Disasters. I mean, when you're discussing the tiny but pivotal blunders of history, head injuries are worthy of special note here too. At least two famous historical figures suffered from traumatic brain injury, TBI, which arguably affected their judgment and mental health, and perhaps even had a major impact on history itself.
Yes, the title of that particular chapter is the British King and the American General. I might have said the British King, the American General, and the African novelist. I might have added Ernest Hemingway in there also, who had a brain injury. He was in an airplane in 1954, I believe it was 55, and it crashed, and they were trapped inside the cabin. And to get out, he bashed his head against the windshield and finally busted it out. But it led to a head injury, and he was never quite the same after that. Pugilistic dementia or a brain injury. But going back to the other two, Patton, it was a famous equestrian, wealthy family, playing polo in Hawaii in 1936, was thrown from his horse, struck his head, and was unconscious for over 2 days. 2 days. And so and he was also thrown horses that hit his head other times besides that. Well, after his death, they asked permission to do an autopsy, and they wanted to examine his brain to see if, in fact, there was the brain damage that so many people thought was there. But his wife refused to allow it to happen. But there's a very good chance that he suffered from pugilistic dementia. He would find his basic judgment was not affected, but he would fly into these rages and do a lot of crazy emotional things. And so if he had not had that injury, it was a problem for him leading up to World War II, because some people thought he was insane even then. But instead of Omar Bradley being the second in command in Europe there, it might very well have been Patton. He might have been more effective. Maybe the war would have ended 6 months sooner with him in charge, a healthy, competent Patton, of course, something that we'll never know. King Henry VIII made the mistake of jousting with the visor of his helmet open. The lance came through, struck him in the forehead, knocked him and the horse over, and he was unconscious for 2 hours, but then finally recovered consciousness. His wife had, it was Anne Boleyn, I believe that's right, went into shock and was miscarried kind of as a result of the shock, apparently. But King Henry was never the same after that. People remarked on how cruel he became, how impulsive he became, erratic. His behavior became very erratic. Also, one of the symptoms of that kind of head injury, huge weight gain, became very obese and was never the same. So that bump on the head changed the behavior of the nation of England and had an impact on world history as well.
Well, Jared, all I can say is you must have done a heck of a lot of research for this book, I tell you. You're going back into the dark ages, my friend.
Yes. It's tiny mistakes of a long history.
Well, the book is about kings, presidents, and generals caught in pivotal situations at times of great crisis, miscalculating and miscommunicating at a critical time in their positions of responsibility. In the midst of all this muck and calamity, it might be refreshing to hear about the story of great courage and insight involving leaders who saved a worthy cause. You're really asking, but what is the basic purpose here? Has all of this just been a freak show of human misfortune, do you think, filled with quirks and amusing novelties? Or is there some more worthwhile message that readers, especially young people who may read this book, might take with them after they've had a good read?
Yes, that's my hope, is that it's not just, okay, here's a bunch of amusing stories about this mistake or that mistake, that there's a lesson to be learned that the young people in particular, all of us can take away from the book. I talk in there about Atul Gawande, who wrote a book, the Checklist Manifesto, and he was wondering the great complexity in medicine. It was getting to be such, can any human being be able to handle it? And he wondered how they were doing it over in the airline industry. So he went to speak to the people there at Boeing, and his research took him back to a famous airline accident in 1935, in which two very good pilots made a simple mistake. They did not turn off the elevator yoke, caused the airplane nose to go too high. Okay, it stalled and it pancaked down and killed both the pilot and the co-pilot. These were very outstanding pilots, one of the best in the industry. And so Boeing said, well, what can we do to prevent this kind of mistake from ever happening again? And they went back to an ancient tool, the humble checklist. And so now, it's been now for a number of years, a basic part of pilot preparation and training, that the pilot and the co-pilot go down a checklist. We turn such and such a dial to such and such a position, check. We take the elevator yoke and we turn it off, check.
It's my word,
And all 37 or 48. And human beings can only think about one thing at a time. You have to make sure, human nature, you have to make sure that that the human beings think about all 37 of those items. All 43 of those items are all taken care of, so you don't take off, and there's some major glitch that can cause the airline to crash, or the plane to crash. So he took that and adapted it into the operating room, the checklist system, and they got dramatic results. They reduced the fatalities from operations by 36%, an amazing number, saved 6% more than were being saved otherwise. They also found that when everybody in the operating room had introduced themselves to each other, everybody knew everybody else's name, that opened up communication that also is very helpful in terms of having successful results. So those same basic lessons that apply for airliners and airplanes, and also operations, complex operations, can be applied to putting together a garden, to building a treehouse, to building a kind of a soapbox derby for your son. Good emphasis on preparation and on the checklist to make sure all the details are accounted for and there's nothing that goes missing. So that's my hope, that high school students, college students can learn those lessons for a good preparation. And,
be a little more thorough. My word. Well, mistakes, mistakes amongst powerful individuals are common throughout your book. But small players, I mean, they can also have an effect on history. Can you give us another example, perhaps?
Yes, one of my favorites of someone at a low level making a huge mistake that changed the outcome of an empire and the course of history was Croesus, and also the Cyrus the Great. They were at war with each other. And it's a long story, but I'll just summarize it in just a few sentences. Croesus was being laid siege to there at he was the commander. He was the emperor of Lydia, but anyway, they were laying siege to him at the city, and it looked like that Cyrus the Great had overplayed his hand. Winter was coming. They were going to have a hard time even withdrawing through the winter months back to his home territory. And then a tiny mistake took place. One of the soldiers inside the city accidentally kicked his helmet off the top of the wall. Okay, and so he falls down the wall, and he climbs off the top of the wall and walks down a pathway down to the bottom of the wall, gets his helmet, puts it back on, climbs back up. That's a secret pathway. One of the soldiers there, hey, wait, look, what's going on? There's a pathway up the side of the wall. So the next night, a raiding party climbed up that wall, came up over the top, went over, was able to force open the gates. Cyrus's soldiers come pouring in, and they conquer the city. And had not been for that single mistake, the city might never have fallen. Croesus, the expression "richest Croesus" refers to him because he was a very, very wealthy king, and he was defeated. His outcome is unclear. According to Adronomos, he was taken in by Cyrus as an advisor. According to other sources, he was put to death. But that one helmet being kicked off the top of the wall made all the difference.
Jared, let me ask you, I mean, what prompted you to write a book with such a unique take on historical events? I mean, what got you interested in studying history?
Yes, since I was a teenager, I just found it very interesting. All the personalities, all the interaction, more interesting than any novel. And then I got this idea, which I wonder how often that really happens about the nail leading into an empire collapsing. And here's I thought of one example. Then here's another example. And here's another example. And start doing research and find more and more examples. Turns out it's pretty common that small mistakes can make such a big difference. And you talk to people, and they were very encouraged about how interesting the book was, or interesting the idea was. And just at first, I thought I'll run a magazine article about it, but it just kept growing and growing and growing. Now it's a pretty thick book. It's about 430 pages, and there are 3 chapters I didn't even include because it's the book was already getting so thick.
Well, there you go. And I mean, we're nearly running out of time, but there's a couple of areas I wanted to touch on. We did talk before about the wonderful checklist and going into hospitals because, there's a whole chapter in there on medical mistakes. This certainly is it's a timely topic considering the COVID crisis. And there was another area too. Many people think that Hitler was crazy, but he had an amazing grasp of facts, apparently, that amazed his generals and a brilliant political mind. But he was such a mongrel. Do you think he was crazy or just damn right evil?
Well, I think he was damn right evil. Now, there was also a Dr. Morale, a quack doctor, who was shooting him full of amphetamines. And also, apparently, evidence to indicate...
Yeah, I lost you there. That was amphetamines, right? They were shooting him full of amphetamines. Is that what you said?
Yeah, amphetamines. Yes, amphetamines. And also, apparently, may also have been shooting him full of opioids. And initially, of course, the reaction is wonderful. You feel strong, you feel energetic, and so on and so forth. But it has an extremely corrosive, as we know, behavior damage on someone's thinking. And about 1941, right in there, 40, 41, 42, it started to have an effect on Hitler's irrational behavior. He would, whenever the more threatened he became, the more he'd go into these euphoric hour and a half long tirades, screaming and yelling and so on and so forth like that. And he'd lost his rationality. His decision to invade Russia, a serious question, but then also his decision to declare war on the United States was not a rational decision whatsoever. Germany was a relatively small country, very advanced technology, but we already had an extremely full plate. And now we're going to take on not only Russia, we're also going to take on the United States, which was a very foolish decision. So in there someplace, the drugs he was receiving from Dr. Morale, the opioids and the amphetamines, tilted his judgment, and he kind of went off the edge, which is actually good for the Allied cause. There was actually an assassination team that was going to be dropped. In fact, I think they were dropped in near Birch's Garden, and they were going to assassinate him, but they said he was making so many mistakes. We don't want.
Let him hang himself, sort of thing.
Yes, let's let him go.
Unbelievable. But I think he was suffering too from the disease gonorrhea, wasn't he? That affects you.
There was stories that he might have had syphilis. However, the balance of the opinion is that no, he did not have syphilis. What he had was, at the very end, I kicked Dr. Morale out of the bunker saying, "You've been shooting me full of opioids." At the very end, he seemed to realize what was going on. So I think it was a question of drug abuse more than anything else.
Let me ask you this, Jared. Do you believe people will learn valuable lessons from this particular book that you've written about conducting their own lives?
Yes, hopefully it will encourage people to ask themselves. A minister was saying that the one question you should constantly ask yourself is, what is the wisest decision that I can make in this situation? And sometimes rather than just giving in to impulses or giving in to sloppy thinking, maybe if you ask yourself that, what is the wisest decision I can do in this situation? And also a big emphasis on preparation and organization, and of course the checklist approach, being mindful that a tiny mistake can have such devastating consequences, and do everything you can to avoid those small mistakes and come out with the right conclusion in the end.
Well, it gets you thinking. Before something flashed into my mind when you touched on Hawaii, because I have to wrap up with you now, but you no doubt would have seen the movie Pearl, right? It was a great movie, but the part that made me sick was the fact that when those planes, the Japanese planes, were approaching Pearl Harbor and just started coming over, the contact from the top of the mountain didn't work, that darn thing. And here they are dancing and carrying on like life's terrific. And in the meantime, they weren't believing their codes that were coming through that it was possible. So there's two instances right there that could have changed, perhaps have changed the real outcome of Pearl Harbor.
Yes, it's a big, I won't take time now, but it's a big controversy whether they actually did know that they were coming. There's some people who say that FDR and General Marshall knew that they were coming, wanted to get the United States involved in the war, but that's a whole great big subject, and that's no one knows the answer there.
We're touching on 9/11 now, aren't we? Another thing. Listen, this is a fabulous book. I couldn't put the darn thing down. Tiny Blunders, Big Disasters, 39 tiny mistakes that changed the world forever.
Let me mention it. People can go to the tinyblundersbigdisasters.com to the website, and we have a great book trailer there. We also have 2.5 chapters you can read for free and have a portrait gallery. So it's kind of a fun website to visit in and of itself.
Fabulous. Good on you, mate. That's the way to do it. What's that address again?
tinyblundersbigdisasters.com.
Okay. And of course, it's, Barnes & Noble, Amazon, Goodreads, and so on. Good luck, mate. Well done with all the awards and the accolades. And there you are on the bestseller list over 7 months. Good job. It was lovely speaking with you.
I appreciate it very much. Thank you, Mark.
Oh, you've got it.